Hey everyone, welcome back to another Blender tutorial. It's been a while since the last one, but we're back in. Today we're going to be creating this sort of another abstract animation, this cool alien distorting thing. It's pretty sweet looking. And we're actually going to be using the default cube. So just go ahead and add a subdivision surface modifier. Pump that up to 4 or so, something like that. And you can apply it or not, doesn't matter, as long as you have the render in view set to the same thing. And then we're going to add a displacement, if I can even, there it is. Add a new texture, click this to go over to that pane, switch it to clouds, turn the size up quite a bit. And we're just going for a cool shape here, basically. We're just trying to find an interesting base shape. So that kind of works. Let's actually make it a little bit bigger, though. The size a bit bigger. And maybe if we turn the depth down, there we go. So now we've got this kind of weird shape. This quite alien shape, actually. If we go in and go ahead and add a decimate modifier, set it to planar and all boundaries, this is super sweet. You pump this angle limit up, and it doesn't look super crazy how it is now, but if we go ahead and add a wireframe modifier, you'll see what I'm talking about. It makes these super cool sectioned off weird shaped things. And if we turn off replace original, you can see sort of how I made the beginnings of that. So I'm going to just an angle limit of maybe 24 or something. Yeah, that looks good. Maybe actually a little bit down from there. There we go. And so we have this cool sort of shape here. And one thing that we can do is actually, if we move it up and set this displacement to global, we can change what it looks like until we find something that we like. That actually looks pretty cool. So I'm going to turn the angle limit up a little, maybe down. Just messing around with it to find a cool shape. That's all I'm really doing here. Okay. And that looks good. So at this point, what we're actually going to do is add an edge split modifier and put it above the wireframe, and add a subdivision surface modifier after the wireframe. We need to turn the edge angle all the way back down so that we have these individual bits here. And we're going to turn the wireframe to have no even thickness and have boundary. And then we're going to turn it up. And that, as you can see, is where that shape comes from. Now if we move it up and down, we can see we get a bunch of different versions of it, basically. So just search out one you find, because we have that displacement set to local. And maybe something like that looks cool. I'm going to rotate it, perhaps. And that looks cool. Alright, sweet. So now at this point we have the basic shapes. I'm going to go ahead and add some materials now. So we're going to have a first material and our second material. I'm just going to really quick make it so we can differentiate them. And go back to the modifiers, and you'll see on the wireframe there's this material offset. Just set that to 1, and there we go. Now we can go back over to that material. And I think I had a red color. Now we have this sweet red looking thing, and if we set it to smooth shading, as you can see, looks pretty sweet. This cool alien object, and we're going to make it distort now. We'll set up the materials all the way later. But first, I'm going to set the end of the animation to be 100 frames, just so it's not a super long animation. And I'm going to make this loop. I'm going to have it be rotating. but we actually need to set this back to local, I believe. And we'll just clear out its rotation, excuse me. And the reason we need to set that to global is we're actually going to set the secondary displacement to be local displacement. Otherwise, we'll have some pretty not smooth results. It'll be quite glitchy looking. So we need to change this texture because it's intersecting. It doesn't look very good. So I'm going to switch out for maybe a Musgrave texture. Actually, if I turn the size down, jeez, and then go back to the modifier and turn down its strength. Oops, a little too much. And yeah, that would work. Alright, so if we look in the camera view here, it's pretty good, but we want it to be square, at least in this example. So I'm going to set it to 1024 by 1024. And I'm also going to move it a little bit. And then if you click GZZ, you can zoom in. If you hold shift, it'll be a little bit slower. And I'm actually going to zoom quite a bit out so that I can go into the camera settings and turn up the focal length, which is basically zooming in without actually moving the camera. Alright, so now we have our object here, and it looks pretty sweet. So we're going to make the sort of waving distortion along it now. So we're going to go back to our not so cube looking cube object, and we're going to add another displacement modifier, and we're going to put it before the secondary subsurf, before the wireframe, before the edge split. And if we click new texture, go over to that texture, as you can see it's a Musgrave texture, and the secondary one needs to be global. So now if we move it, that's where that movement comes from. Now if we had our first one as global, this is what would happen. That doesn't look very good. So that's why we have the secondary one that's displacing later on the stack. And then we can just go ahead and choose basically whatever texture we want. This one, if we turn the size up a little bit, actually maybe down, not quite that much, but that looks pretty cool. And then we'll just turn up the strength a little bit and adjust the size. This is all completely artistic preference, obviously, but that looks pretty sweet. So there we go. Now we have our distortion. I'm just double tapping R there to be able to rotate in a gimbal way. This is like gimbal-like thing. Alright, that looks awesome. Sweet. So now we're going to actually work on the animation part. And in order to do that, I'm just going to set this to 3, both of these ones, just to make it a little bit smoother. That's not necessary for the animation, but I think it'll look better. So what I'm going to do now is, from the camera view to see what it looks like, I'm going to rotate it to a position that looks good. So something that looks cool. And actually, I might want to turn the strength down on that one. No, never mind. And I'm obviously just adjusting these on the fly just because I want it to look cool. And there we go. So I'm going to set this to be the first position. I rotation. Move along about 20 frames. RR. Move to a new one. Rotation. Move along some more frames. Double tap R. Find a new rotation. And double tap RI rotation. Now, for the last one, if I go back to the rotation here, it's about 90, negative 30, 280. So if we go over here, and it's at about, that's about good. And then I rotation. If we now play it, you can see it's a little bit too much motion here. So I'm going to delete this keyframe, Alt-I, just because it's moving too fast for me. Now, that's actually a bit too slow. So I'm going to go into the dope sheet here, This is obviously animation, so it's completely up to you how you want to do it. But just moving this around and making it look kind of nice. So we have this motion here. It looks pretty cool up until about here when it stops moving. I'm going to go into the graph editor, and at this point looks pretty good, but it doesn't loop. As you can see, it moves around a bit, comes back around, and then stops. And in order to get it to loop like that, all I have to do is take this first keyframe here, and Shift D for duplicate, and just move it right onto the 99th frame, which is actually a little bit hard to do, but that's okay because we can zoom in and move it later. So I'm just moving this. There we go. So now we have this 100 frame animation, and if I'm not mistaken, it should loop. As you can see, there's no cutting. It just keeps going. Now, if you set the end of the animation to 99 or 98 or whatnot, you can get it to be a little bit smoother. There we go. That's actually a little bit better. And that's basically it. You can set whatever rotations you want. You can animate however you would like. Now, if we go into render view here, it looks like garbage because we haven't actually set up the materials. So for this one, I'm just going to have a principled shader with a red color. Pretty simple, not too complicated whatsoever. For this one, we're going to also have a principled shader, except for I am going to have it be a black color and have the roughness. It's actually already at 0. Now our roughness on this guy, this is a really, really shiny red, so I'm going to blur it out a little bit. Now obviously the gray background is not helping very much, so let's go out of background here. I'm going to go to the render settings and down to film transparent background and add a use nodes for the world, and for the color we're going to use an environment texture to use an HDRI. You can use whatever one you want, but I think I have some cube maps here. I just saved them as cube maps. Here we go. I'm just going to use that one. I will link some nice HDRIs in the description. Now, as you can see, that looks pretty sweet. And in order to add the cool sort of sheen, the sheen I had in the animation I showed you at the beginning here, I'm just going to turn down the strength of this one a little bit. And if we go back to solid view, I'm going to add a plane and SY to make it long, like this. Move it and then rotate it, just so it's kind of pointing at it, and add a material, new material, have it be emissive. And then we're going to need to turn it up quite a bit. 200 might be a little bit too much, but we can adjust that later. So I'm just going to duplicate this now and scale these down a little bit. Duplicate them and just moving them around. And I don't want them to be in view of the camera, so I will just adjust them until they look good, and I think they might give a nice reflection. And if I go into render view now, as you can see, it's quite bright. You can see sort of some reflections in there, but not very good. So I'm going to select this one and then move it. I think going back into solid view might be better. This is lighting, just trying to get a cool reflection on here. Having one directly behind it might look cool. And then just scaling it on its local y-axis by tapping S, Y, Y. And there we go. If I rotate this, we should now have this nice reflections in here, and it should get that sheen. But as you can see, it's way blown out, so we actually do need to turn that brightness way down. 100's too much, 70's too much, 40 is too much, 15 seems about right actually. If I go to any particular frame in the animation, I think I need to add some more of these objects around just to get reflections everywhere. Otherwise, it'll look boring. And we don't want that. We want this to be a cool alien animation. Alright. At this point, it's looking about right. That looks weird. So I'm going to move that light around a little bit. And any luck? There we go. And I'm going to turn down our world strength just a tad. Now we have got this cool animation, and if we were to render it out, it would look something like this. Now, hopefully that wasn't too complicated. It is quite a few modifiers, but in my opinion, it looks pretty sweet. So, if you liked the video, you could go ahead and like, and if you're feeling particularly nice, you could go ahead and subscribe. And with that, I will see you guys later.